Air Marshal Derek Washington stands frozen as passengers record the aftermath of the slap. Flight attendant Amber Pierce screams about feeling threatened while passengers look on in shock. The captain announces an emergency landing. Derek's career and freedom hang in the balance as security personnel approach. The truth behind the incident remains hidden. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more stories about people standing up against discrimination. The truth behind what happened on Flight 2783 will leave you speechless. Derek Washington checked his service weapon one last time before tucking it securely into his shoulder holster. 15 years as a federal air marshal had made this routine second nature, but he never allowed himself to become complacent. At 43, with salt beginning to pepper his closely cropped hair, Derek carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen and diffused more dangerous situations than most people would encounter in a lifetime. Another day, another flight, he murmured to himself, adjusting his tie in the mirror of the Miami International Airport bathroom. As a decorated former Navy SEAL with multiple commendations throughout his career with the Federal Air Marshal Service, Derek was respected by his peers and supervisors alike. His calm demeanor, quick thinking, and unwavering dedication to passenger safety had earned him a reputation as one of the best in the service. Today's assignment was Flight 2783, a routine Miami to Seattle route that rarely presented problems. Still, in the post-9 divided by 11 world, no flight was ever truly routine. Intelligence reports had recently flagged increased chatter about potential threats on transcontinental routes, which explained why Derek was paired with Riley Jackson today. Riley was newer to the service, only 4 years in, after transitioning from the FBI. At 32, the former college basketball player was enthusiastic and competent, though still learning some of the nuances of air marshal work. She admired Derek immensely, often telling colleagues she had won the mentor lottery when assigned to work with him. All set, Washington, Riley asked, approaching Derek in the secure area of the terminal. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard business casual attire that allowed air marshals to blend in with regular passengers. "Good to go, Jackson," Derek confirmed, keeping his voice low. "Remember, we board separately. You're in coach section 23B. I'll take first class seat 3 amperes, standard communications protocol." Riley nodded, then hesitated. "I heard this might be one of your last assignments. Is that true?" Derek sighed. It wasn't supposed to be common knowledge yet, but news traveled fast in their tight-knit community. Considering it, he admitted, "Zara's 16 now. These last few years of high school are important. I've missed too much already." The thought of his daughter brought a rare smile to Derek's face. Zara was his world, brilliant, athletic, and growing up too fast. After losing her mother to cancer when she was just 7, Derek and Zara had become an inseparable team, but his frequent absences weighed on him heavily, especially as Zara approached college age. What he didn't mention to Riley was the veiled threats TSA Director Patrick Sullivan had made when Derek floated the idea of retirement. Sullivan, a politically connected bureaucrat with little field experience, had implied that early retirement might affect Derek's pension calculations. Budget considerations, Sullivan had called it, though Derek suspected it had more to do with Sullivan's discomfort with having a black man as one of the agency's most decorated officers. "We'll see," Derek concluded, checking his watch. "Time to move. Remember, this route has been flagged." As they separated for boarding, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that Sullivan's parting words at their last meeting carried an unmistakable message. "People like you should be grateful for these positions," Sullivan had said, a subtle emphasis on people like you that Derek had heard too many times in his life. Pushing those thoughts aside, Derek focused on the mission. Passenger safety was all that mattered now. Everything else, retirement plans, Sullivan's thinly veiled racism, even thoughts of Zara's upcoming basketball tournament would have to wait. The pre-flight security meeting had been brief but tense. Derek had noticed the slight hesitation from the gate agent when checking his credentials, the double take that had become all too familiar, the subtle request to see his ID again when his white colleagues walked through with a nod. Small things insignificant to most, but they added up over a lifetime. Still, Derek remained professional-focused on the task at hand. Today was just another day protecting American skies. Derek boarded first, as per protocol. Air marshals typically secured strategic positions, allowing maximum visibility and quick response time. For this flight, his first-class seat afforded a clear view of the cockpit door, the most critical area to protect. Settling into seat 3 amperes, Derek observed the other passengers boarding. He mentally cataloged Face's behaviors and anything unusual, a professional habit impossible to turn off. The cabin crew bustled about with pre-flight preparations led by senior flight attendant Amber Pierce. Amber, blonde and in her early 30s, moved with practiced efficiency. Her perfect makeup and manicured nails suggested someone who took pride in appearance. As she welcomed first-class passengers, her smile seemed permanently fixed until she reached Derek. "Ticket, please," she said, her smile noticeably tightening. Derek handed over his boarding pass. "Good morning." Amber scrutinized his document longer than she had for previous passengers. "Are you sure this is your seat?" she asked. Emphasis on your subtle but unmistakable. "Yes, I'm certain," Derek replied, evenly maintaining his cover as a business traveler. Amber responded, returning his boarding pass with barely concealed suspicion. "Well, if you need anything, just press the call button." The interaction lasted seconds, but spoke volumes. Derek had experienced this before, the implicit questioning of whether a black man belonged in first class. He remained outwardly unfazed, though internally he added this to the mental tally of microaggressions that had punctuated his career. As boarding continued, Derek noticed Amber's behavior with other passengers. Her warmth seemed to correlate directly with their appearance and perceived status. The elderly white couple in 2 amperes and 2B, Frank and Dorothy Williams, according to their overhead conversation, received enthusiastic recommendations about menu options. The middle-aged white businessman across the aisle got a complimentary headphone upgrade without asking. Meanwhile, the young black woman in 4C had to ask twice for a blanket. The Asian American family in row 5 received curt, minimal service. Most passengers wouldn't notice these subtleties, but Derek's training made him attuned to patterns of behavior. He watched as Amber directed another flight attendant to keep an eye on a group of young Middle Eastern men in coach, though they were doing nothing but quietly taking their seats. Derek continued his surveillance, identifying key passengers who might become important witnesses or allies if an incident occurred. Professor Calvin Bennett, a distinguished-looking black man in his 60s who Derek recognized from his frequent TV appearances discussing civil rights history, sat in 1B. Emily Chen, an Asian American woman working intently on legal briefs, her bar association card visible as she searched for a pen, occupied 3B beside him. As the final passengers boarded, Derek spotted Riley taking her position in coach. Their eyes met briefly, a professional acknowledgement invisible to others. Just before the cabin door closed, Amber leaned close to another flight attendant near the galley. Though speaking softly, Derek's trained hearing caught fragments, too many of them on this flight, always demanding special treatment. The other attendant glanced toward the diverse passengers in coach and nodded sympathetically. The cabin door closed with a definitive thunk. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Derek felt a familiar tension. Years of experience told him this flight would test more than just his security protocols. Maintaining his cover while witnessing Amber's discriminatory behavior would require the emotional discipline he'd perfected over decades of similar encounters. For now, Derek would observe, But if her behavior escalated to affecting passenger safety or interfering with his duties, protocol would require intervention. As the engines roared to life, Derek settled in for what promised to be a challenging 6-hour flight to Seattle. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into the drowsy rhythm typical of long-haul travel. Most passengers dozed or watched movies on their screens. Derek maintained his vigilance, occasionally changing positions to prevent stiffness while keeping the cockpit door in his sight line. During a quiet moment, elderly Dorothy Williams in 2B pressed her call button. Derek watched as Amber, chatting with a white male passenger at the front of the cabin, noticed the light, but continued her conversation for nearly 2 minutes before responding. Yes, Amber asked, her tone suggesting inconvenience rather than service. "I'm so sorry to bother you, dear," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the soft cadence of the South. "But my husband needs his medication, and we need some water." Frank Williams, clearly uncomfortable, shifted in his seat. The elderly black man's hand trembled slightly as he held a small pill case. "I'll get to it when I can," Amber replied, glancing back toward the galley. "We're preparing for the meal service right now." Derek noted that no such preparation was actually underway. As Amber turned to leave, Dorothy's face fell in resignation, the look of someone accustomed to such treatment. Making a quick decision, Derek stood. "Excuse me," he called quietly to Amber. "While you're preparing, would it be possible for someone to bring these folks some water? It seems medically necessary." Amber froze, then turned slowly to face Derek. "Sir," I said, "I'll get to it. Please return to your seat, and don't interfere with cabin crew duties." "Of course," Derek replied calmly. "I just thought since it's medication." "Are you telling me how to do my job?" Amber cut in loud enough that nearby passengers looked up. I said, "I'll handle it." Derek raised his hand slightly in a placating gesture and returned to his seat. Within moments, another flight attendant, having overheard the exchange, quietly brought water to the Williams couple, earning a scowl from Amber. 15 minutes later, Derek overheard Amber speaking to another flight attendant in the galley, their voices carrying to his trained ear. "These people always stick together," Amber muttered, acting entitled, trying to give orders. First, that professor demanding extra pillows, now this guy playing hero. Maybe he was just trying to help, the other attendant suggested. "Please," Amber scoffed. "I know his type. Probably used a upgrade voucher to get into first class, then thinks he runs the plane." Derek remained impassive, though the comment stung with their familiar prejudice. His focus shifted as he noticed unusual activity several rows behind Riley's position, a passenger making frequent trips to the bathroom, appearing increasingly agitated with each return. The man kept checking his watch and glancing toward the cockpit. Standard protocol required Derek to alert Riley. Using the pre-arranged signal, he requested water from a passing flight attendant, placing his napkin in a specific position. Riley would understand this meant to observe the suspicious passenger in row 27. As meal service began, Derek continued monitoring both the suspicious passenger and Amber's increasingly problematic behavior. She accidentally spilled water on Professor Bennett's papers, served the Asian American family last despite their proximity to the galley, and repeatedly addressed the Hispanic businessman in 6 amperes in unnecessarily slow, loud English. Despite his polished responses, the situation reached a breaking point when the suspicious passenger made another move toward the front of the aircraft. Derek needed to communicate directly with Riley, but found Amber deliberately blocking the aisle while serving drinks her back to him despite his polite, "Excuse me." After his third attempt to pass, Derek made a critical decision. Leaning close to Amber, he quietly said, "Federal Air Marshal, I need to move through the cabin for security purposes." Amber's eyes widened, first in shock, then in unmistakable disbelief. "Yeah, right," she whispered back. "You expect me to believe that?" "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," Derek insisted, showing her his credentials discreetly. This is a security matter. Amber stared at his identification, her expression hardening. This doesn't look real. You don't look like an air marshal. What does an air marshal look like? Derek asked pointedly. I don't know, but not. She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Captain Thomas Reynolds chose that moment to emerge from the cockpit for a bathroom break. Seeing the tension, he approached. Is there a problem here? This passenger claims he's an air marshal, Amber said, immediately emphasizing claims with obvious skepticism. He's demanding special treatment and trying to move around the cabin. The captain studied Derek with immediate suspicion. Sir, please return to your seat. If you continue to disrupt my crew, we'll have authorities meet the plane. Captain Derek began, I need to speak with you privately. It's regarding passenger safety. Return to your seat, sir. The captain repeated firmly, positioning himself beside Amber in a show of solidarity. Meanwhile, the suspicious passenger had used the distraction to move even closer to the cockpit door, now just 2 rows away. Derek had no choice, he needed to act. Captain Reynolds Derek said more forcefully, producing his credentials. Again, Federal Air Marshal Derek Washington. There's a potential security situation developing that requires immediate attention. The captain's eyes narrowed as he examined the ID, his expression suggesting the same disbelief as Amber's. We have no record of an air marshal on this flight. You wouldn't. That's the point, Derek explained, frustration mounting as the suspicious passenger edged closer. I don't have time for this, Derek said, finally attempting to move past them toward the developing threat. He's trying to force his way through, Amber suddenly announced loudly. Captain, he's being aggressive. The suspicious passenger, hearing the commotion, abruptly changed direction and began moving quickly toward the rear of the plane where Riley was now standing, having recognized the developing situation. Derek needed to coordinate with her immediately, but Amber and the captain were creating an increasingly dangerous obstruction. This is your final warning, Captain Reynolds said. Return to your seat or face consequences when we land. The tension that had been building for hours was about to explode, and passenger safety hung in the balance. I need to see real proof, right now. Amber demanded, her voice rising as she positioned herself directly in Derek's path. The suspicious passenger was now moving rapidly toward the rear lavatory, where Riley was discreetly monitoring him. I've shown you my credentials twice, Derek replied, maintaining his composure despite the escalating situation. Federal air marshals are on this flight for passenger safety, which is being compromised right now. Anyone can buy a fake ID, Amber scoffed, looking to Captain Reynolds for support. Thomas, I don't feel safe with this man trying to take control of the aircraft. The captain's hand moved subtly toward the cockpit door, a gesture Derek immediately recognized as preparation to call for emergency protocols. Captain Derek said with quiet authority, check with dispatch using code Sierra Alpha Mike 49er. They'll confirm my identity. Before Reynolds could respond, Amber called out to her colleagues. Kelly Marcus, I need assistance in first class immediately. 2 additional flight attendants rushed forward as passengers began to stare openly at the confrontation. Professor Bennett had put down his book and was watching intently, while Emily Chen appeared to be discreetly recording the interaction on her phone. What's happening? Kelly asked, arriving breathless beside Amber. This passenger is claiming to be an air marshal, Amber explained loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. He's trying to force his way through the cabin and won't return to his seat. Ma'am, Derek tried again, his training evident in his controlled tone. You're creating a scene that's compromising aircraft security. The real threat is... The real threat. Amber interrupted, her voice shrill. You hear that? He's threatening us now. From the corner of his eye, Derek saw Riley attempting to intercept the suspicious passenger who had now removed something from his carry-on and was heading toward the rear emergency exit. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Derek made a split-second decision and reached for his phone to activate the emergency Marshal network alert, a last resort measure that would notify all law enforcement on the ground and in air of an in-flight situation. Amber misinterpreted his movement. "He's reaching for something," she shrieked, backing away dramatically. "He's got a weapon." "Miss Pierce, I'm reaching for my phone," Derek stated clearly, moving deliberately slowly. "There is an actual security threat developing that you are preventing me from addressing." Riley had almost reached the suspicious passenger when she was intercepted by Marcus, who had misunderstood the situation and moved to block her path as well. Derek needed to move now. With calm determination, he stepped forward, attempting to move past Amber. "Ma'am, please step aside. This is a federal security matter." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Derek moved forward, Amber's hand swung up and out in a wide arc, connecting with his cheek in a slap that echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. The crack of palm against face froze everyone momentarily. Passengers gasped. Captain Reynolds stared in shock. Even Amber seemed surprised by her own action. Derek Washington, 15-year veteran of the Federal Air Marshal Service, stood perfectly still, his face stinging from the assault, but his expression unchanged. Years of training prevented any instinctive reaction. Into the silence, Amber began to sob theatrically. "He was going to attack me. I was defending myself. Did everyone see how threatening he was being?" Professor Bennett stood up. "That's absolutely not what happened. I witnessed the entire exchange." "Stay out of this," Amber snapped at him before turning back to the captain. "Thomas, I don't feel safe. This man was aggressive, and I feared for my safety." During this chaos, Riley had finally managed to reach the suspicious passenger and was quietly but firmly escorting him back to his seat, her marshal credentials discreetly displayed. Derek took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. "Captain Reynolds," he said, voice clear and carrying throughout the now silent first-class cabin as a federal air marshal under Title 49 of the U.S. Code. "I am officially reporting an assault on a federal officer and declaring a security emergency on this aircraft. This plane needs to be diverted to the nearest suitable airport immediately." He removed his marshal badge from his inner pocket, the full credentials, rather than the discreet ID he'd shown earlier, and held it up for all passengers to see. Additionally, he continued as gasps rippled through the cabin, "I'm officially requesting that Flight Attendant Pierce be removed from duty for interfering with federal security operations and assaulting a federal officer in the performance of his duties." Do you think Amber's behavior was motivated purely by racism, or was something else going on? Comment number 1 if you believe she was just prejudiced, or number 2 if you suspect she might be involved with the suspicious passenger. Somehow. What would you have done in Derek's position after being slapped? Would you have maintained your cool like he did, or would you have reacted differently? Hit that like button if you admire Derek's professionalism under pressure. And subscribe to see what happens next in this shocking confrontation. Do you think the captain will side with his flight attendant? Or follow the air marshal's orders? Let's find out what happened after the plane was grounded. A stunned silence blanketed the first-class cabin. For 5 full seconds, no one moved. Not Derek, not Amber, not Captain Reynolds, not a single passenger. The only sound was the steady hum of the aircraft engines as the Boeing 737 continued its path across the Midwest. Then, like a dam breaking, everything happened at once. Amber's theatrical sobbing transformed into genuine panic as she realized the gravity of her actions. "He's lying," she shrieked, backing away from Derek. "That badge could be fake. He's trying to hijack the plane." Passengers who had been filming the confrontation continued recording their phones, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Emily Chen, still discreetly recording from 3B, had positioned her phone to capture the clearest view of the slap and its aftermath. I felt threatened. Amber continued, her voice climbing higher with each word. He was aggressive. He was trying to force his way into the cockpit area. Professor Bennett stood up again, his distinguished presence commanding attention. "That is categorically false," he stated firmly. "I've been watching this entire interaction. This gentleman has been nothing but professional while you've been confrontational and frankly discriminatory in your service." "Sir, please return to your seat," Captain Reynolds ordered Bennett before turning to Derek. "You too, sir. We'll sort this out on the ground." Captain Derek replied evenly, "There's still an active security concern on this aircraft. My partner has temporarily contained the situation, but we need to divert to the nearest suitable airport immediately." Reynolds hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and his apparent loyalty to Amber, finally training one out. "I'll contact air traffic control for diversion clearance," he said stiffly, before adding, "but this isn't over." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Amber collapsed into a jump seat, still maintaining her victim narrative. "Did everyone see how he threatened me?" she asked the cabin at large. "I was just doing my job and he became aggressive." Dorothy Williams, the elderly passenger from 2B whom Derek had tried to help earlier, spoke up. "Young lady, that's simply not true. My husband and I saw everything. That man was polite to you, even when you weren't deserving of it." More passengers began murmuring in agreement, their collective perspective clearly contradicting Amber's version of events. The aircraft's PA system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a security situation, we will be diverting to Denver International Airport. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We anticipate landing in approximately 25 minutes. Derek used the moment to move toward Riley, who had positioned herself near the suspicious passenger. They exchanged information in hushed tones. "Subject contained," Riley reported quietly. "Name is Victor Mercer, according to his boarding pass. Found suspicious package in his carry-on. Appears to be unrelated to Pierce's behavior." "Keep him isolated," Derek instructed. "Denver authorities will take him into custody. I'll deal with the flight crew situation." As they spoke, Amber had regrouped with her fellow flight attendants, all huddled near the forward galley. Their whispered conversation was punctuated by glances toward Derek. It was clear she was building support for her version of events. Captain Reynolds emerged briefly from the cockpit. "Air Marshal," he said, the title now used with reluctant acknowledgement. "Denver authorities have been notified of the situation. They'll board as soon as we land." "Thank you, Captain Derek," replied professionally. "Just to be clear, we have two separate situations, the security threat my partner is handling and the assault on a federal officer by your senior flight attendant. Both will require official reports." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Miss Pierce has worked for this airline for 12 years without incident. I find it hard to believe." "There are approximately 24 witnesses and multiple recordings of the assault," Captain Derek interrupted calmly. "This isn't about belief. This is about what happened." The tension between them was palpable as the aircraft began its descent into Denver. In the main cabin, passengers were speculating wildly about the diversion. Some had witnessed the confrontation. Others had only seen the aftermath. And rumors spread quickly through the rows. The words "Air Marshal slap" and "racist flight attendant" traveled from seat to seat. Derek returned to his position in first class, maintaining visual contact with Riley and their suspect. Though outwardly calm, internally he was processing the implications of what had just occurred. His cover was blown, something that rarely happened in his 15-year career. The subsequent investigation would be extensive. His plans for retirement might now be complicated by lengthy administrative procedures. More concerning was how quickly the situation had escalated based solely on what appeared to be Amber's racial bias. Had she simply acknowledged his credentials, the potential security threat could have been addressed discreetly without the public confrontation that now endangered everyone. As the plane descended through clouds toward Denver International Airport, Derek caught sight of the emergency vehicles already positioning themselves on the tarmac. Police cars, FBI vehicles, and TSA response units created a formidable welcome party. This incident had officially become a major security event. The aircraft touched down with a firm jolt, taxiing quickly to a remote area of the airfield rather than to a terminal gate standard procedure for security incidents. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Reynolds announced we have landed safely in Denver. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until authorities board the aircraft. I repeat, do not leave your seats. As the engines powered down, Amber made one last attempt to control the narrative. "This is all a misunderstanding," she announced to the first-class cabin. "I was just protecting all of you from a potentially dangerous situation." Professor Bennett shook his head in visible disgust. "Young woman, you assaulted a federal officer who was trying to do his job. The only dangerous situation was the one you created." Outside law enforcement personnel approached the aircraft. Within moments, the cabin door would open and the official investigation would begin. Derek Washington, still standing with perfect posture, despite the chaos he had endured, prepared to give his report. The truth would come out, he would make certain of it. The aircraft door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Denver police officers were the first to board, followed by TSA officials and FBI agents. Their coordinated movements spoke of a well-rehearsed protocol for aviation security incidents. Federal Air Marshal Washington Derek identified himself to the lead FBI agent, a stern-faced woman named Agent Diaz. "My partner, Air Marshal Jackson, is in Road 23 with a person of interest." Agent Diaz nodded briskly. "We were briefed on your alert. What happened?" Before Derek could respond, Amber pushed forward. "This man assaulted me," she declared, tears streaming down her face. "He was trying to breach the cockpit. I was protecting the aircraft." Captain Reynolds stepped up beside her. "There's been a misunderstanding. Miss Pierce believed she was following security protocols." "That's not what happened," came a chorus of voices from first-class passengers. Professor Bennett stood again, his academic authority evident in his bearing. "I witnessed the entire incident. The air marshal was nothing but professional. Miss Pierce assaulted him after displaying consistently discriminatory behavior toward passengers of color." Agent Diaz raised her hand for silence. "We'll take statements from everyone. First, we need to secure the aircraft." She turned to additional officers. "Please escort Miss Pierce and the air marshal to separate areas for preliminary interviews." As Derek was led toward the front of the plane, he passed Riley escorting the suspicious passenger Victor Mercer, now in handcuffs. "Package contained unmarked pills," Riley whispered as they crossed paths. "Looks like drug smuggling, not terrorism." Derek nodded, relieved that at least one aspect of the situation was being resolved cleanly. On the jetway, police had created makeshift interview areas. Derek provided his official statement detailing both the security concern regarding Mercer and the confrontation with Amber Pierce. Throughout his account, he remained factual and professional, even when describing the slap that had left a visible mark on his cheek. Across the way, Amber's interview was considerably more emotional. Her voice carried as she insisted he didn't look like an air marshal. "How was I supposed to know? He was aggressive and threatening." "What does an air marshal look like?" the interviewing officer asked, echoing Derek's earlier question. Amber faltered. "You know, official, like law enforcement, not like what Miss Pierce." She didn't complete the thought, but her implication hung in the air. Meanwhile, passengers were being deplaned gradually, each providing statements as they exited. Emily Chen approached the officers, her phone in hand. "I'm an attorney," she explained. "I recorded most of the incident. You'll want to see this." As the investigation proceeded on the ground, Derek's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from Zara. "Dad, are you okay? Seeing news about diverted flight with aggressive passenger confronted by heroic flight attendant. Please tell me that's not your flight." Derek's heart sank. Already, the story was reaching media outlets, and predictably, the initial framing favored Amber's version. He texted back quickly, "I'm safe. Don't believe news reports. Will call soon." No sooner had he sent the message than TSA Director Patrick Sullivan's name appeared on his screen. Derek answered, bracing himself. "Washington, what the hell happened up there?" Sullivan barked without preamble. "Sir, I was responding to a security threat when the senior flight attendant interfered with my duties and subsequently assaulted me when I identified myself." "That's not how the airline is characterizing it," Sullivan replied coldly. "They're saying you were disruptive and threatening and that Pierce acted in defense of the aircraft. There are multiple witnesses and recordings that will confirm my account," Derek responded. "Until this is sorted out, you're on administrative leave," Sullivan announced. "Turn in your credentials to the Denver field office before you leave." "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't a discussion, Washington. You've compromised a security protocol by publicly identifying yourself. There will be consequences." The call ended abruptly. Derek stood motionless, processing this latest development. After 15 exemplary years of service, he was being treated like a rookie who had violated basic protocols. Back in the terminal, the media had already arrived. Local Denver news crews set up outside security, and national outlets were calling in remote reports. On a nearby television screen, Derek caught a glimpse of the headline scrolling across CNN, "Flight attendant assaulted by aggressive passenger claiming to be Air Marshal." Professor Bennett approached, having completed his statement. "Officer Washington, that's a blatant mischaracterization of what occurred. I've made it clear in my statement that you were the victim, not the aggressor." "Thank you, sir," Derek replied, genuinely appreciative. "I recognize discriminatory behavior when I see it," Bennett continued. "I've experienced and studied it my entire life. What happened on that plane was textbook racial profiling, and I won't stand by while they twist the narrative." As they spoke, Riley joined them, looking troubled. "The Denver TSA director just interviewed me. They're trying to build a case that we violated protocols, Derek. They barely asked about Mercer and his smuggling operation." "Of course they are," Derek replied grimly. "Sullivan's already put me on administrative leave." "What? That's absurd," Riley exclaimed. "Amber Pierce assaulted a federal officer and interfered with a security operation. How are we the ones being punished?" Before Derek could respond, his phone buzzed again with a news alert. The story had evolved. Sources claimed disruptive passenger on diverted Denver flight was legitimate air marshal, raising questions about flight attendants' actions. At least some of the truth was beginning to emerge. Still, Derek knew from experience how these situations typically played out. The airline would protect its employee. The TSA would distance itself from controversy. And despite clear evidence, he would likely face the greater scrutiny simply because of who he was. As if confirming his thoughts, Derek spotted Amber being escorted to a private airport lounge, not a police vehicle. Captain Reynolds walked alongside her, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Neither had been placed on administrative leave despite their interference with federal security operations. Emily Chen approached, handing Derek her business card. "I specialize in discrimination cases," she explained. "What I witnessed today was egregious. If you need legal representation, please call me." Derek accepted the card, thanking her quietly. The situation was evolving from a security incident into something much larger, potentially a landmark discrimination case against a major airline. As the day progressed, more passenger videos began circulating on social media. The hashtag number #FlyingWhileBlack started trending, with Derek's experience resonating with countless others who had faced similar discrimination. Zara called, her voice tight with worry. "Dad, you're all over Twitter. Some videos show what really happened. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," he assured her, though the weight of the situation was settling heavily on his shoulders. His career, his reputation, and his future now hung in the balance because a flight attendant couldn't believe a black man could be a federal air marshal. As Derek prepared to leave the airport, having surrendered his credentials as ordered, Riley caught up with him one last time. "This isn't over," she promised fiercely. "I'm not letting them throw you under the bus. We're partners and I've got your back." Derek nodded gratefully, though he harbored no illusions about the difficult fight ahead. The truth was on his side, but as he had learned throughout his life and career, sometimes the truth alone wasn't enough. 3 days after the incident, Derek sat in the office of Attorney James Howard, an old friend from his Navy days, who had become one of Denver's most respected civil rights lawyers. The small, book-filled office provided a temporary sanctuary from the media storm that had engulfed his life. "They're trying to bury you," Derek Howard said, bluntly reviewing the preliminary TSA report. "Sullivan has already gone on record suggesting you overreacted to standard security questions from the flight crew." "Standard security questions don't include, 'You don't look like an air marshal,'" Derek replied, his usual composure slipping slightly. Howard nodded, making notes. "We have that statement corroborated by multiple witnesses. That's good." On the desk between them lay printouts of social media, posts, news articles, and transcripts of passenger statements. The narrative was shifting daily, sometimes hourly. As more information emerged, passenger videos had indeed begun circulating widely, though most captured only fragments of the confrontation. Some showed Amber's slap clearly, while others began recording after the fact, catching only Derek's official declaration grounding the plane. Context was missing from most clips, allowing multiple interpretations to flourish. "Have you seen this?" Howard asked, turning his laptop to show Derek a Twitter thread. A passenger from Coach has posted a detailed account describing how Amber Pierce provided noticeably inferior service to minority passengers throughout the flight. Says he observed it from the bathroom line and was disgusted but not surprised. Derek scanned the post. The passenger, Jordan Michaels, had documented specific instances that aligned with what Derek himself had observed: the delayed service to the Williams couple, the accidental water spill on Professor Bennett's papers, the condescending treatment of the Hispanic businessman. "This supports the pattern of behavior I reported," Derek noted. "Exactly. We're building a case that Pierce's actions weren't an isolated incident, but part of a consistent pattern of discriminatory behavior," Howard explained. "And there's more." Howard pulled up another document, a court filing. Emily Chen wasn't just any passenger. She's a partner at Chen Goldberg and Walsh, specializing in discrimination cases. She's offering to represent you pro bono and has already filed for an injunction to prevent the airline from destroying any surveillance footage or records from the flight. For the first time in days, Derek felt a glimmer of hope. "That's substantial support." "It gets better," Howard continued. "Riley Jackson has been working behind the scenes. Despite pressure from Sullivan to distance herself from you, she's doubled down. She's found something interesting about Pierce." Howard slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a collection of passenger complaints filed against Amber Pierce over the past 5 years. Most had been quietly resolved with vouchers or dismissed outright, but a clear pattern emerged. Nearly all came from passengers of color, alleging rude, dismissive, or inadequate service. The airline buried these, Howard explained. Standard corporate procedure: handle complaints individually so no one notices the pattern. But Riley convinced someone in HR to leak them. "She's risking her career," Derek said, concern evident in his voice. "She says you'd do the same for her," Howard replied simply. As they reviewed the documents, Derek's phone rang an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered. "Marshal, Washington. This is Helen Patel. Internal Affairs TSA Office of Professional Responsibility. I'd like to meet with you privately regarding the Flight 2783 incident." Derek glanced at Howard, who nodded encouragingly. "I can meet you, but my attorney will need to be present." "That's fine," Patel replied. "I'm not here to build a case against you. There are inconsistencies in Captain Reynolds' report that concern me. Also, you should know that Sullivan's been unusually invested in this investigation." After arranging the meeting, Derek hung up thoughtful. Sullivan's involvement isn't surprising. He's been looking for an excuse to push me out for months. Why? Howard asked. I filed complaints about racial disparities in assignments and promotions within the Air Marshal Service. Sullivan buried them, but I kept pushing. He doesn't like being challenged, especially by a black man who's better at the job than most of his favorites. Howard finished. Derek nodded, then turned his attention to a news alert on his phone. The story had evolved again. Airline facing scrutiny as more passengers come forward about discriminatory treatment on diverted Denver flight. Meanwhile, Riley had sent a text with a crucial update. Found connection between Reynolds and Pierce. They've been dating for 6 months. Airline policy requires disclosure of relationships between crew members. They never reported it. This explained the captain's immediate defense of Amber, despite clear evidence of misconduct. It wasn't just professional courtesy, it was personal protection. As Derek and Howard strategized their next steps, another message arrived, this time from Professor Bennett Washington. I've organized a group of passengers willing to make public statements supporting your account. We're not letting this stand. Call me. The tide was turning, but Derek remained cautious. His years in law enforcement had taught him that justice wasn't automatic, even with evidence on your side. The meeting with Helen Patel proved illuminating. The serious, methodical internal affairs investigator brought previously undisclosed information. Captain Reynolds instructed the flight crew to delete security footage from their personal tablets, she revealed. It's a serious violation of evidence preservation protocols. Fortunately, the data is backed up to cloud servers. Why would he do that if they believed Pierce acted appropriately? Howard asked, though the answer was obvious. Exactly, Patel replied. Additionally, there's something odd about that passenger Mercer. His smuggling operation seemed sophisticated, yet he made amateur mistakes. It's almost as if he wanted to be caught, Derek suggested. Or as if he was a distraction from something else happening on the flight. Patel nodded. We're investigating possible connections between crew members and smuggling operations. It wouldn't be the first time flight crews were involved in drug transportation. The implication was staggering. If Amber had deliberately interfered with Derek's duties, not because of racial bias, but to prevent him from investigating criminal activity, she was involved with the case took on entirely new dimensions. As the meeting concluded, Patel offered one last piece of information. You should know that Amber Pierce's father is Gregory Pierce, Executive Vice President at Meridian Airlines. Her entire career progression has been unusual. Fast-tracked promotions, disciplinary actions disappearing from her file prime roots, despite relative inexperience. Nepotism, Howard remarked. At minimum, Patel agreed. I'll be following up on these connections. Outside the meeting, Derek checked his phone again. Zara had started a social media campaign with her friends, numbered Justice for Air Marshal. Washington was gaining traction with thousands of shares and supportive comments. Dad, we're not letting them smear you, she had written. Your whole life you've shown me to stand up for what's right. Now it's my turn. Pride swelled in Derek's chest, even as concern for his daughter's public involvement tempered it. The spotlight brought support but also unwanted attention, including hateful messages from those who reflexively sided with Amber. That evening, Emily Chen called with another development. The complete footage from my recording has been authenticated and submitted to investigators. It clearly shows the entire sequence, including Pierce's discriminatory comments about passengers and her explicit statement about you not looking like an air marshal. Thank you, Derek said sincerely. That evidence is crucial. There's more, Chen continued. I've been contacted by 3 former Meridian Airlines employees who allege systematic discrimination in how the airline handles customer complaints. They're willing to testify that complaints from minority passengers are regularly dismissed, while similar complaints from white passengers receive immediate attention and compensation. The pieces were falling into place. building toward what could become a landmark discrimination case against one of the country's largest airlines. What had begun as a single confrontation was expanding into an examination of institutional practices. As the day ended, Derek sat on his hotel balcony, contemplating how quickly life could change. 1 week ago, he'd been considering quiet retirement. Now he found himself at the center of a national conversation about race authority and accountability. His phone buzzed again, Riley, with another update. Security footage shows Pierce having extended conversation with Mercer before boarding. They definitely knew each other. This wasn't random, Derek. Something bigger is happening here. The investigation was deepening, branches extending in unexpected directions. Whatever the truth ultimately revealed, one thing was certain: Derek Washington's fight for justice was just beginning. 8 days after the incident, Derek Washington sat in a conference room at the Denver Federal Building, surrounded by his growing legal team. James Howard and Emily Chen reviewed documents while Riley paced nearby, officially on duty but fully devoted to clearing her partner's name. "It's happening," Riley announced, looking up from her phone. The complete passenger videos have been released to major media outlets. CNN is running them now. They turned to the wall-mounted television, where the footage from Emily Chen's phone played in its entirety. Unlike the fragmented clips that had circulated initially, this comprehensive recording captured the full confrontation, including Amber's discriminatory comments, her disbelief at Derek's credentials, and most damning of all, her unprovoked slap, followed by her immediate attempt to portray herself as the victim. The anchor's voiceover was unambiguous. This exclusive footage clearly contradicts initial reports that characterized Air Marshal Washington as aggressive or threatening. The video shows Washington maintaining professional composure throughout the confrontation, even after being physically assaulted by flight attendant Amber Pierce. "They're getting it right," Emily observed with satisfaction. The coverage continued with interviews from Professor Calvin Bennett and several other passengers from Flight 2783, all corroborating Derek's account. Bennett, speaking with the gravitas of his academic background, placed the incident in historical context. "What we witnessed was a textbook example of racial profiling," he explained to the interviewer. "Miss Pierce couldn't reconcile her biased perception of what an air marshal should look like with the black man before her, despite being shown proper credentials twice. This is precisely the kind of discriminatory judgment that has plagued our society for generations." Derek's phone buzzed with messages of support from colleagues and friends who had seen the coverage. Even several of Sullivan's most loyal deputies at the TSA had reached out privately to express their support, suggesting the director's position was becoming increasingly untenable. The media tide had turned decisively, but the most significant developments were happening behind the scenes. Helen Patel entered the conference room, carrying a secure tablet. "You need to see this," she said, placing the device on the table. "We've completed our analysis of the security footage from Denver International Airport before the flight. This shows Pierce meeting with Victor Mercer in a coffee shop 2 hours before boarding. They clearly knew each other, contradicting her statement that she had never seen him before. The footage played silently, showing Amber and Mercer in deep conversation, occasionally glancing around as if checking whether they were being observed. At one point, Mercer slid what appeared to be a key card across the table, which Amber quickly pocketed. "There's more," Patel continued. "Financial investigations have uncovered suspicious deposits to an offshore account linked to Pierce. 5 deposits of $10,000 each over the past year, all within 48 hours of flights on routes flagged for drug trafficking concerns. She's part of the smuggling operation." Derek concluded, the pieces finally clicking into place. "That's why she was so determined to prevent me from investigating Mercer." It wasn't just racism, though, that clearly played a role in how she chose to interfere. It was self-preservation. "Exactly," Patel confirmed. "And Captain Reynolds' involvement is now clear as well. His relationship with Pierce appears to have begun shortly after she recruited him into the operation. He's received similar payments. Riley joined them at the table, adding her own discovery. I've been reviewing the crew manifests for those suspicious flights. Guess who else was regularly assigned to them? Kelly Martinez and Marcus Johnson, the same flight attendants who backed Pierce's story without question. They've been using Meridian Airlines as a smuggling network, Emily Chen realized, with Pierce's father in upper management to help cover their tracks and manipulate crew assignments, which explains why complaints against Pierce and others were consistently buried, James Howard added. Gregory Pierce was protecting not just his daughter, but the entire operation. Derek sat back, processing the enormity of what they had uncovered. What had begun as a single instance of discrimination had led to the exposure of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. At that moment, Derek's daughter Zara video called. Her face appeared on his phone screen, beaming with excitement. Dad, have you seen Twitter? Your hashtag is trending nationally, and there's a petition with over 100,000 signatures demanding your reinstatement and an investigation into the airline. I've seen it, sweetheart, Derek replied, moved by his daughter's passionate advocacy. Your support means everything to me. Are you kidding? You've spent your whole life standing up for what's right. Now everyone else is finally seeing what I've always known my dad as a hero. As Derek ended the call, wiping unexpected moisture from his eyes, the conference room door opened again. This time, it was a senior FBI agent accompanied by the U.S. Attorney for Colorado. Marshal Washington, the U.S. Attorney, began, "We'd like to brief you on the expanded investigation into Meridian Airlines. Your experience has uncovered what appears to be one of the largest drug trafficking operations using commercial aviation in recent history." The meeting that followed revealed the stunning scope of what Derek's stand against discrimination had inadvertently exposed. The smuggling network extended beyond Amber Pierce and Captain Reynolds to include dozens of Meridian employees across multiple airports, moving millions of dollars worth of drugs throughout the country. Gregory Pierce, Amber's father, was now the subject of a major investigation, suspected of using his executive position to facilitate the operation, arranging favorable crew assignments, suppressing security concerns, and even influencing TSA scheduling to ensure certain flights received less scrutiny. By evening, the news had broken nationwide. Major outlets led with the dual story of discrimination and criminal conspiracy at one of America's largest airlines. Meridian's stock plummeted as investors fled the scandal-plagued company. TSA Director Sullivan, who had so quickly placed Derek on administrative leave, now faced his own scrutiny. Internal communications revealed he had dismissed previous concerns about suspicious patterns on Meridian flights, with some suggesting his relationship with Gregory Pierce extended beyond professional courtesy. At Derek's hotel that night, Riley arrived with a bottle of sparkling cider for an alcohol-free toast. The deputy director called, she announced. Sullivan's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. You're being reinstated effective immediately with a formal apology from the agency. Justice moves quickly when the evidence is undeniable, James Howard observed. And when the public is watching, Emily Chen added. As they celebrated this turning point, Derek's phone rang again, this time displaying Zara's school number. Concerned, he answered immediately. Mr. Washington, this is Coach Taylor from Roosevelt High. I wanted to let you know personally that Zara just broke the school basketball scoring record in today's game, 38 points. She dedicated the game to you. Pride swelled in Derek's chest. Through all of this turmoil, his daughter had remained focused and determined, qualities he had always tried to instill in her. She mentioned you might finally be able to attend the state championships next weekend, Coach Taylor continued. The team would be honored to have you there. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Derek replied, realizing that this was what truly mattered, being present for his daughter's moments, big and small. As he ended the call, Derek reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 8 days. From a routine flight assignment to the center of a national conversation on racial justice to uncovering a major criminal conspiracy, all stemming from one flight attendant's inability to believe a black man could be a federal heir. Marshal. The fight wasn't over. There would be trials, testimony, and continued media scrutiny. But the truth had emerged, vindication had come, and justice was being served. For Derek Washington, that had always been the mission both in his professional life and in the values he sought to instill in his daughter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he would call Zara and tell her how proud he was, not just of her basketball record, but of her unwavering belief in standing up for what's right, even when the world seems determined to stand against you. 6 months after the incident, on Flight 2783, Derek Washington adjusted his tie as he prepared to enter the congressional hearing room. The wood-paneled chamber with its imposing dais had hosted many historical moments, and today promised to be another, the culmination of an investigation that had grown far beyond one confrontation on an aircraft. "Ready?" Riley Jackson asked, standing beside him in the corridor. Now promoted to supervisory Air Marshal Riley had been instrumental in unraveling the full extent of the Meridian Airlines smuggling operation. "As I'll ever be," Derek replied with a small smile. Inside the room was packed with media industry representatives and the public. The Congressional Subcommittee on Transportation Security had convened special hearings to address both the discrimination issues and criminal activities exposed in the aftermath of Flight 2783. As Derek took his seat at the witness table, he spotted familiar faces in the audience. Professor Calvin Bennett nodded respectfully from the second row. Emily Chen sat with her legal team, having successfully argued for a class action lawsuit against Meridian Airlines on behalf of minority passengers who had experienced discrimination. James Howard gave a subtle thumbs up from his position near the committee staff. And in the front row, Zara Washington sat proudly, her varsity basketball jacket visible under her formal blazer. Roosevelt High's championship trophy, secured with her leadership 3 months earlier, now sat in the Washington family living room. Committee Chairwoman Representative Eleanor Sanchez called the hearing to order. Today, we continue our examination of discriminatory practices and security vulnerabilities in commercial aviation. Specifically, the case that has become known as the Air Marshal incident. We welcome Air Marshal Derek Washington, whose courage in standing up to discrimination ultimately exposed a massive criminal enterprise. As Derek was sworn in, he reflected on the extraordinary developments of the past 6 months. Amber Pierce, Captain Thomas Reynolds, and 14 other Meridian Airlines employees now faced federal charges for drug trafficking and obstruction of justice. Gregory Pierce, Amber's father, had been indicted for racketeering, with evidence suggesting he had used his executive position to facilitate the smuggling network for years. Perhaps most satisfying was the fate of former TSA Director Patrick Sullivan, who now faced his own federal indictment for accepting bribes to direct air marshals away from certain Meridian routes. His prejudiced treatment of Derek had been just one manifestation of a deeply corrupt leadership style. Marshal Washington Representative Sanchez began. Please share with the committee your account of the events on Flight 2783 and how your experience reflects broader systemic issues in transportation security. Derek leaned toward the microphone, his voice clear and measured, as he recounted not just the specifics of the confrontation with Amber Pierce, but the context surrounding it, the casual discrimination he had observed throughout the flight, the dismissal of his authority based on his race, and ultimately the criminal conspiracy his persistence had helped uncover. The incident on Flight 2783 was not isolated, he explained. It reflected both individual bias and institutional failures. Miss Pierce's refusal to acknowledge my credentials despite clear identification wasn't merely a procedural disagreement. It stemmed from her inability to reconcile her biased perception of what an air marshal should look like with the preferent black man standing before her. For the next hour, Derek answered questions from committee members, providing insights into both the specific incident and the broader culture that had enabled it. His responses were thoughtful and nuanced, neither downplaying the reality of racial discrimination nor painting with too broad a brush. "And what reforms would you recommend Marshal Washington to address these issues?" asked Representative Jackson, the ranking member. "Three specific areas require immediate attention," Derek replied. "First, comprehensive anti-bias training for all transportation security personnel with regular reinforcement and measurable outcomes. Second, transparent reporting mechanisms for passengers experiencing discrimination with independent oversight to prevent incidents from being buried. And third, structural reforms to security protocols that currently create vulnerabilities exploited by operations like the Meridian smuggling network." As the hearing continued, Derek articulated a vision for a transportation security system that was both more effective and more just. One that protected passengers without subjecting minority travelers to unwarranted suspicion or mistreatment. When the formal testimony concluded, representatives from both parties commended Derek for his service and courage. It was a rare moment of bipartisan agreement in an otherwise divided Congress, recognition that the issues exposed transcended political divisions. Outside the hearing room, reporters gathered for statements. Derek spoke briefly, emphasizing that the reforms being discussed would benefit all Americans by creating a more effective and equitable security system. As the media dispersed, TSA Deputy Director Michaels approached Derek. "The promotion package is ready," she said. "Assistant Director of Training and Professional Standards. The position was created specifically based on your recommendations." Derek had been considering this offer for weeks. The role would allow him to implement the reforms he had championed, training a new generation of air marshals to be both effective in their security duties and conscious of their own biases. "I appreciate the offer," Derek replied, "but I've made my decision. After 20 years of federal service, it's time for me to step back. I've accepted a position with the Civil Rights Division at Justice Consulting on transportation issues, but with normal hours and no more extended time away from home." Deputy Director Michaels nodded understandingly. "We'll miss your leadership, but I respect your choice, and I suspect Zara is happy about it." Ecstatic, Derek confirmed with a smile. "I haven't missed a game since the championships." Later that afternoon, Derek met with the foundation team. He had assembled a diverse group of security experts, civil rights attorneys, and education specialists dedicated to implementing bias training throughout the transportation industry. The Equitable Skies Initiative, funded by the settlement from Derek's discrimination lawsuit against Meridian, had already begun pilot programs at major airlines. The congressional testimony went well, Professor Bennett noted, as the meeting began. The recommendations are gaining traction on both sides of the aisle, and the Meridian case has created a watershed moment for the industry, added Emily Chen. Airlines are falling over themselves to implement bias training and review their complaint procedures. Nobody wants to be the next Meridian. Indeed, Meridian Airlines itself had undergone dramatic restructuring. With Gregory Pierce and numerous executives facing prison sentences, the airline had been acquired by a larger carrier that promised comprehensive reforms, including the implementation of training programs designed by Derek's foundation. Riley, attending the meeting during her off-duty hours, shared updates from inside the Air Marshal Service. The new Internal Affairs Unit is reviewing past discrimination complaints that were previously dismissed. And our first diversity recruiting initiative has increased minority applications by 40%. As the meeting concluded, Derek walked with Zara toward the parking garage. His daughter, now in her senior year and fielding basketball scholarship offers from multiple universities, had developed a keen interest in civil rights law inspired by her father's experience. "So this is what winning feels like," she observed, linking her arm through his. "Not just the legal cases, but actually changing things." "It's a start," Derek replied. "Real change takes time and persistence." But yes, this is what progress feels like. That evening, as they arrived home, Derek checked his email to find a message he had been expecting. The final sentencing hearing for Amber Pierce had been scheduled for the following month. Prosecutors were seeking a substantial sentence given her role in both the drug operation and the attempt to frame Derek. There was a time when such news would have brought satisfaction, even vindication. Now Derek felt only a quiet resolve that justice was being served. His focus had shifted from the individual who had wronged him to the systems that had enabled her and to building something better for the future. As he closed his laptop, Derek noticed the framed photo on his desk, a new edition captured by a news photographer outside the courthouse after the initial verdicts. In it, Derek stood flanked by Riley, Professor Bennett, Emily Chen, and Zara, their faces reflecting not just triumph, but determination. It was the face of a coalition that had turned one moment of injustice into a movement for change. From his home office window, Derek could see the basketball hoop he had installed in their driveway years ago, where Zara had practiced countless hours to develop the skills that would soon take her to college. The sight reminded him of what had always mattered most, being present for his daughter, teaching her by example that standing firm against injustice, however difficult, was always worth the fight. The incident on Flight 2783 had begun with a flight attendant's slap, a moment of discrimination that could have remained just another indignity suffered in silence. Instead, it had become a catalyst for exposing corruption reforming systems and reminding America that justice, while not always swift, was still possible when people of conscience stood together. For Derek Washington, that knowledge was the greatest victory of all. Derek Washington's story teaches us that standing against discrimination requires both personal courage and systemic change. Individual acts of bias like Amber's treatment of Derek and other minority passengers reflect deeper institutional problems that often go unaddressed. When we witness discrimination, remaining silent perpetuates the problem. True justice demands accountability at all levels, from frontline employees to corporate executives who enable or cover up discriminatory behavior. Derek's experience demonstrates how racism can compromise not just dignity, but safety, as Amber's prejudice ultimately endangered everyone on that flight. Perhaps most importantly, this story shows the power of documentation and witnesses. Without passenger videos and testimonies, Derek might have been another victim of a distorted narrative. In today's world, recording injustice is often the first step toward addressing it. Finally, we see that creating meaningful change requires persistence. Derek didn't stop at winning his personal battle. He dedicated himself to reforming the systems that made discrimination possible. Real progress comes when we transform individual injustice into collective action for lasting change. What discrimination have you witnessed or experienced while traveling? Would you have the courage to stand up like Derek did if placed in a similar situation? Share your stories in the comments below. If this account of battling racism inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and resilience. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that standing against discrimination makes a difference. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters in the fight for equality and justice.